Welcome, everyone. This is a Redbird migration like no other. We're obviously connected electronically, and I think we have more people in attendance than we've ever had before. And I'm particularly pleased to be able to moderate this panel. I'm Craig Fuller, a longtime aviation enthusiast, once at AOPA as the president, but really somebody who has a deep appreciation for the industry and all that's being done. And it's a pleasure to be here with a group that's been assembled. I've always thought that a really strong and vital general aviation community is terribly important, and having strong leaders in these organizations that represent general aviation is really tremendous. And to have the best of the best here with us in this panel is a real treat. So I want to turn right to them first, and I think, Allison, I'll start with you. What I'm going to ask each of you to do is just introduce yourself so you get a chance to talk right up front. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing, and also reflect a little bit on your interaction from your organization with the flight training community. So Allison, over to you.
Thanks, Craig. I am Allison McKay. I am the CEO of Women in Aviation International. I have the unique experience of starting in this role in February of this year. So really all I have known in this position is a COVID pandemic environment. And Women in Aviation International is really an organization that was created to support and encourage women in this industry. And I think that in this pandemic era, it is more important than ever. And we have really worked to engage with our membership and our community as virtually as possible. And the flight training community is just a subset of that. And so Zoom and those platforms are vital to engaging that community. We have a robust chapter network, and so even at the community level, we are able to engage them and really help support them through this time. These organizations are sometimes very small mom and pop organizations and have really suffered through this pandemic. And what they need is a community that can help them weather this storm and get back to the robust industry that we know and love.
Great, thanks so much. I'm going to kind of go around my screen, and Mark Baker, you're up next. It's always a pleasure to share a panel discussion with you. But Mark, tell us a little bit about what you guys are up to.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, things at AOPA are very interesting right now. And as we've navigated the beginning of this pandemic, which is hard to believe, 7 months ago or so, we've seen general aviation as it started out, as everything was kind of shut down, slow for March and April. But as people started to have the need to travel and in some ways requirement travel, whether it's recreationally or for business, GA activity has been booming. We measure it by the 77 airports that the FAA kind of measures, and they're seeing between 25 and 30% more traffic. Many of you have heard that more 172s in the air than frankly, Boeing 737s in the air in any given moment right now. And most of our flight schools that I talk to within our network are indicating, not everywhere, but largely, that they're busy and full. And many of them that are working with our app here to how to do better at flight training have been giving us a lot of feedback that maybe a little bit of different segmentation and population that's showing up at the flight school. People that want to get a rating, finish a rating, or upgrade a rating, or come back from being rusty and get back actively flying because of the need to access some of these markets that we've seen all over the country. And in my flying around the country and everything from Cubs to Citations, I have talked to FBOs, and anywhere from 60 to 70% up in AvGas sales is not unusual that I hear all over the country. Some of the jet fuel sales are a little bit softer because of the international clearly not going anywhere, and some of the large flight departments may not be working as much. But boy, there is a lot of activity out there today, and I'm really proud of what's going on at AOPA right now to make sure that all 5,000 of these public airports stay open, continue to be vibrant, and continue to drive, the population that works at all these airports in a very significant way. So we got a good news story going on. I think it's going to be I actually believe it's going to be a permanent shift for support of GA for a long time to come.
Great, thanks so much. Hey, Jack, you guys have been introducing young people to flying for a long time, so I know it's a long and deep commitment to getting people involved in training, but give a little update on what you're up to.
Yeah, at EA, we're very much on the front end where we're trying to encourage young people to get involved in grassroots aviation as enthusiasts, also with encouraging pathways into the career format. But it's very, very early on. So our involvement with the flight training organizations is really that pipeline and trying to help that pipeline with not only driving the commercial professional aspect of it, but the grassroots fun flying piece of it, as Mark mentions, which is still standing up very strong relative to even getting through COVID. Our biggest dilemma has been we have a large chapter network like Allison does. Big part of what they do are Young Eagle rallies, which primarily from March, even as we see today, have been slowed way down. And most of that around the protocol of people feeling comfortable taking other passengers that they don't know up for flights. And the good news is we're seeing more and more re-engagement, well, as people start looking at the disinfecting and the masks and those kinds of protocols. What we do see is a lot of people working on their home built projects, a lot of people on restorations. We're a big part of what Mark talked about as far as the numbers of airplanes that are out there recreationally flying. We went early on kind of in a campaign saying there were people that felt uncomfortable saying, I have this privilege of being able to fly, and my neighbors feel like all they can do is hang out in their basement because of orders. And it was, no, it's okay. Get out to the airport, get in your airplane, look down on everybody, enjoy the freedoms that you have. And we think we've seen that start to really pay dividends of people getting back into the air and enjoying that. So we're very much like Mark in that we think that there's still an incredible pent-up demand of young people who are anxious to learn to fly. We think, I know as we go through this panel on the career track side, we'll think that that's probably still in a boom time as we get through the pandemic. And then we also, as far as our engagement with the training providers and folks like Redbird are continuing to look at how do we take the best in learning we know today, the best way to teach people, the best way to use automation, the best way to use computer-based training, the best way to get people through a process that's still very much stuck back in the 40s and 50s post-World War II training kind of environment. And if we can apply what we're providing today in our modern educational institutions and universities, we think that has a tremendous amount of upside. So we're still excited about the future and where things are going.
Great. Thanks, Jack. Jim, I want to turn to you next. You've made this terrific transition from the FAA into the world of associations and even more importantly, the world of aviation and with rotor and helicopters. Tell us a little bit about what you all are seeing and how you're interacting with the training community.
All right. Well, thanks, Craig, and certainly want to thank Redbird for the invitation and putting us all together again. It's been almost 24 hours since Alice and I spoke. We were talking about diversity and inclusiveness yesterday. So that is one of the things that HAI, has Helicopter Association International, has done is we're doing a weekly kind of instruction, asking our members, hey, why we have this time now. And you can look at your business internally and the operating practices you had. How can you get better? How can we help you as an association get better? Of course, everybody knows that as far as the aerial firefighting and the air ambulance, those guys have been busy throughout. And then that ties right into one of the other programs we tried to do to help our members, which was the COVID Clean program, so that we want to make sure that the public still feels safe getting on board aircraft, helicopters as well. We're trying to work with the tour industry, that they definitely took a big hit on, with tourism stopping. So we're reaching out to our members, trying to have that communication, and like I think as Mark was saying, early on with the training side of the house, I know me living here I live in Virginia, and my helicopter that I have access to is in Maryland, and I normally fly to Pennsylvania. So I'm like, okay, so which state was doing what? What are my requirements? Am I going to get stuck because somebody's going to do something on the ramp when I get there? So I really appreciate all the work AOPA does with their network to make sure that, when you land at an airport, you're not surprised by a different set of rules because you're in a different state. So I think all the work that we do together here for all of our memberships is key to making sure that that general aviation is there for the future as well, and access, with Mark Baker. Those are some of the things, and I look forward to having the discussion later on. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Jim. Hey, Pete, you must feel pretty good. All these guys are pretty positive about what's happening in the world of general aviation. How do the manufacturers do things today?
Well, Craig, as I was reflecting on your question, we just concluded our fall board meeting, and I was thinking virtually every one of our topics touched either flight training or flight simulation. And as we went through the agenda, Charlie was with us the whole time yesterday. And as we went through the agenda, and I'll just pick a few of those, during COVID, we've been able to capitalize on both the FAA and EASA using virtual inspections. And so we do a lot, and we're doing more in flight test simulation, and we're able to go and send that data to the FAA. They validate it without having to travel over there, and that is what we're trying to do, is codify that so that exists beyond COVID, and we can use it later because it's less money for the government. And actually, you can do a lot of things better by providing the data and very good video and audio recordings that you send them than you can actually do with a human mind memorizing or remembering all of that. We got into the insurance discussion, and I know a lot of us are working on this thing that right now insurance is debilitating, and a lot of what we can do to help our community is to make sure that our flight training is transmitted, the amount of training that we do, to the insurance providers so that we can build a case so that we can get decent insurance rates. We had the FAA administrator with us, and we spent a lot of time talking about the return of the MAX, but a lot of that focused on his training program. He made the commitment he was going to fly the MAX before he brings it back into service, and we spent probably 15 minutes talking about the extensiveness of his training program, getting with the flight engineers, and he's looking at a lot of the human factors part. And then with some of our European officials that we were on the line with, we're talking about automation and what we're doing in this new world of advanced air mobility. And training here is the dynamic of training is going to be one of the most important things that we do. And these are aircraft that don't necessarily fly the same way as the aircraft that we're used to, whether it's Jim's rotorcraft that auto-rotate or whether it's our fixed-wing side. You know, the way you turn it, it may not be, roll and yaw and everything. It may just turn on one axis and with a lot of yaw, but you're not controlling it. The computer's controlling it. But at least initially, every one of these pilots is going to need a PPL. So they're going to need to learn to fly traditionally, and then they're going to have to learn the specifics of the vehicle that they fly that is going to be very, very different from the next vehicle. So as we look toward what training will be in the not too distant future, because people don't realize there's 8 aircraft in the certification queue right now with the FAA, not let alone what's over with the EASA right now. So the demand for pilots, and that's why I'm so bullish. Mark and I had this conversation yesterday. Not only do we walk out to an airfield and you talk to any flight school, it's just jam-packed right now. But I'm thinking about what's ahead of us in just a few years, and it's pretty darn encouraging.
You know, I want to, Peter, I want to stick with you for a minute because I know you kind of got into it. I know your members, and I'm thinking particularly, I know Boeing has done a lot of work to try to understand and anticipate the need for flight instructors and training. And I'm just wondering, as we've gone through this pandemic and we're still in it, has that changed? Are they recalibrating that, or do they continue to believe that there's going to be a large need out there in the years ahead?
Well, it's my belief that the demand is going to be there. You know, we've got a lot of pilots that are furloughed from the airlines, but they're not getting any younger. We have people that are out there with some disposable income that are working out of home that have some extra time. So they're saying, I've always wanted to fly. I'm going to go learn to fly because I want to take my family, or I want to go on this trip. And then the other dynamic that I see that's fascinating is a lot of the parts of the country in remote areas you can't find a house for sale anymore. They're selling because people are saying, I don't need to live in the city. I can do things remote now. I need to get to the city once in a while, and general aviation might be the perfect way to do it because we got all of these airfields out there. I don't have to worry about security lines. I can feel safe with the people I fly with. So I just think all of this together with advanced air mobility means that demand is going to remain high. I don't see that we're, with the furloughs, that it's going to negatively impact us on the demand side for flight instructors and flight training.
That's great. Hey, Allison, I think each of us guys have had the opportunity to fly and admire skill women have in the left seat of an airplane. How are you doing in terms of recruiting women into aviation at this stage?
So, I think the one example I will point to is our Girls in Aviation Day. We just hosted our 6th event on September 26th, and typically we have in-person events. Obviously, this year was not possible. So we launched an app which has all of the components that you would get in an in-person event, and it was downloaded in 55 countries. Which in-person events in 2019 we had in countries. So I think that the interest from young women is incredibly strong, and they are more engaged than ever in getting into this industry. And learning all of the components, not just flying an aircraft, but fixing an aircraft, air traffic control, all the elements that make our network strong. So I think that as we look at going into the future, it's demand and the need for the workforce. Boeing just released its latest market out. It has to have a much higher influx of women and minorities than it ever has. And so I think it's a very exciting time when you look at that end.
Great. Mark, Allison raised an interesting point, and really all of your organizations have a sort of international component to it. I know, Mark, there's really almost a federation of international AOPA organizations. Kind of sparks the question, how are we different than other parts of the world? Are you seeing places come back faster than we are? I know we have the largest general aviation community here, but what are you hearing from some of your colleagues around the world in other AOPA international organizations?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag out there in terms of what's happening internationally. As you know, we have over 80 country affiliates that feed us information, and obviously even look to the U.S. as an example of what the best general aviation community is in the world, and the largest for sure. And it's mixed in certain parts of the world. The borders are really closed for accessing, and in other places, and Africa included, people are really using general aviation in a large way for relief supplies and bringing supplies into these markets that may need more medical support. So it's all over the map. But I think we're convinced that general aviation plays a real big role in delivering PPE equipment, and the excitement that I hear often is that there seems to be a rejuvenation and interest in aviation. And Allison's been on our STEM curriculum advisory board since the very beginning of it. We now have all 4 grades, 9th, 11th, 12th, that are very active. And this year we've got 38 states, just over 8,000 young people. A quarter of them are young women that are taking this elective. 40% are people of underrepresented groups. There is a huge interest in careers and learning how to become part of this aviation community that this curriculum has provided. So, and I have requests around the world to have this curriculum available to Egypt and Saudi, and I've had Australia interest in, because the curriculum in aviation is the same worldwide.
Yeah, that's interesting. Hey, Jim, how about you? What are you all seeing in the rotorcraft world internationally?
Yeah, so we are reaching out internationally. It's one of the things certainly I was challenged with when the board hired me, was that they wanted to put the I in HAI. So on the international side, we've been signing up some people with what we're calling the International Partnership Program. We're trying to make sure we've got that communication so that we can share the lessons learned internationally. So we're doing that, and also on the side, Southern Utah University right now, as far as training going, they're saying they're as busy now as they've ever been. So just like everybody else is saying, I think right now with some time to actually do some things as far as that flight training that maybe people have put off, now is a great time to get back into it. And so we see growth in both those areas, Craig.
Interesting. Jack, I don't want to leave you out of the international, but I would like to turn to the point that you made to me recently, which is that we're seeing and likely to see more of the commercial carriers dropping out of some markets and not providing some of the shorter flights they've been providing. And is that going to, in your view, stimulate more private business activity? Jack, you're still on mute there.
There we go. Craig, when we were talking about that, it kind of was deja vu when I first started in with Cessna. We were reflecting on some of the programs that were out in the 70s and 80s to promote general aviation, and GAMA was actively involved in this. And one of the big pitches was to get people using general aviation for business purposes was that 500 nautical mile trip. And that 500 nautical mile trip back then, when the airline services weren't as great as they are today, made a lot of sense at a 172, a Bonanza, a 182, a 210. You pick your airplane. And it's interesting, as the October schedules came out for the airlines, there are so many of the smaller mid-sized cities that had large reductions in the number of connecting flights to the hubs. We see that here in Appleton, Wisconsin, which is primarily the closest to Oshkosh, without going to Milwaukee or Green Bay. Major reductions in the number and frequencies of flights that you could get. So, I put pencil to paper, again, the deja vu of what we used to do in marketing that. And you look at a flight from Wichita, Kansas to Appleton, which is about 550 nautical miles. Today, you got 3 flights available, and it's going to take you door to door. I shouldn't say door to door, from TSA to baggage, about 7.5 to 8 hours with the connecting flights with one connection along the way. You can do that a 180 or a 210 in about 3 hours and 20 minutes and leave whenever you want and come home whenever you want. And you can go all the way up then to a light twin or even a turboprop and knock that down to even under 2 hours. So I think if that's going to be the next 2 years as the airlines reassess their yield figures and city pairings and what they're going to do, it makes for a very, very strong case for people to reevaluate the use of what is out there today, really good priced, used single-engine piston airplanes that can perform that function if you need to go visit relatives, friends, kids in schools, business applications, or any of that, relatively expensive compared to what it's going to cost an airline. So I'm hoping I hate to say reinvent ourselves, but we're going to go back to the past and dust off some of that great material that we have. People walking out to their airplane, they're wearing hats and suits. It might be flip-flops and shorts now, but go out and airplane and be able to make that trip, Wichita to Dallas, Wichita to Chicago.
Jack, that's a real interesting that city pair that you talked about, and if you put one more layer on that and said, okay, you drive out to your airfield, you get in your airplane, you fly, you may be with some other people that you trust that have taken their precautions seriously, and then compare that to how many people and I believe that flying on an airliner right now, with the way we do filtration systems and everything, that part of it is relatively safe when people are wearing a mask. But how many people you actually touch in the terminal, in the TSA line, in the taxi, and all that kind of stuff, boy, what a vast difference. And you put that all together, and it just builds that case even stronger.
Yeah, and
Jack, you kind of take me back to the future, because in some ways, although I learned to fly many, many years ago, when I really started using an airplane, I got a Cessna Cutlass. And what I found is, sure, the travel time was a little longer, but I could do 2 or 3 stops. I could get home the same day I left, and you just can't do that anymore with some of the commercial carriers. So it's got to attract people, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think it's another layer that's compelling for people to consider getting involved in general aviation for those purposes. I don't think that's going to change.
Hey, Pete, I wanted to, speaking of aircraft, I wanted to kind of come back a little bit to training, because I know you've are engaged. Everybody's engaged in it, but I know you've given a lot of thought to this. When you think about training, so much of the training aircraft is older, and yet we're seeing some new exciting things develop with new aircraft, electric aircraft coming down the pike. We certainly hope. I just wondered if you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of training aircraft that will begin to help this flight training community.
Well, I think all of us, whether it's fixed wing or rotorcraft, are seeing that older training aircraft. Now we have a capability, because we all of us have been working very hard on having a capability to upgrade, that we can rip out vacuum systems, make them lighter, put in more modern things under the North Sea policy. We're seeing that in rotorcraft too, because we have a capability to refresh a lot of the older aircraft, and they're in great demand out there right now because our flight schools need them. Then we are selling a lot of training aircraft. There is a lot of effort going forward to, as you saw, Piper, for example, slimming down one of their aircraft to make it more attractive, so people buy in volume other aircraft. So there's that going on. And then obviously Pipistrel got the first electric trainer certified over at EASA. Bioaerospace is very close with the E-Flyer. So that in that short takeoff and landings and beating up the pattern and everything, a great capability. So as we look at that traditional training, I think that part is really good. If you look at training as we move forward to advanced air mobility, I believe most of that's going to be in the simulator. Just because the flights are of such short duration and you're burning up battery time and everything like that, and you're going to be able to do it so well in the simulator that it's going to be a lot like our type ratings that we do now. If you went in a jet to flight safety, you're going to do virtually and get your rating, flying in the simulator the whole time. So that part of it is going to be very heavy on simulation. But because the pilots are going to need a PPL, we're going to need to still pump out conventional rotorcraft and fixed wing for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, so I agree that Pete, as Pete's talking about those future aircraft, the basic certification, if we can keep it as simple as possible with the CAAs around the world, so that you've got the aeronautical decision making, and then you've got this great vehicle that's produced and it's got all the technology on board, that the pilot really is a bit of a manager more than having to do a lot of things. And when you try to, some people try to make it more complex than it is, as far as it may have 8 rotors on board, but can the pilot affect any of them because of redundancy, and the ability to fly on any one that's inoperable is amazing. So I really look forward to the challenges, and that's one of the things I talk to my members about is, number one, a lot of the great, for the current stuff, the AATDs and the BATDs that Redbird produce are amazing. And if you haven't been in one, you need to go out and check one out at your local school. And then the second thing is, we got to remember the mechanics and the people that are going to repair these aircraft. So to look forward to putting these new aircraft into use at your flight school right now is because I think, Pete, you mentioned the number was 8 of the aircraft that are actually flying right now. And I think I saw a number somewhere in one of the vertical flight magazines of somewhere around 300 that are on the drawing board. So there's a lot of interesting vertical flight aircraft coming around.
Jack, you've been involved in training aircraft in different careers. Let's get you into this conversation, because I know you've given it a lot of thought. Are you excited about some of the newer aircraft that are coming along?
I am. I mean, the dilemma has always been, it's kind of like, I don't know if this is the right analogy, but if you look at the airline industry, where you had the legacy carriers versus the newer carriers, legacy airplanes cost structure is just too high. So it's just not making any sense to be able to put some of those older airplanes onto the flight schools and have them actually cash flow and be profitable and create an hourly rate that a student can rent reasonably. And when you look at some of what's happening with the infusion of technology along in various forms, whether it be only electronics in the cockpit and systems, but propulsion systems in themselves, that's the breakthrough kind of stuff that we need to have happen. And it makes so much. You see it in our daily lives, whether it be a Tesla driving around town, or whether it be your home personal electronics. We can make those applications with the help of the FAA on the certification requirements, trying to get rid of some of the onerous legacy requirements that we've had, get those implemented around some of these modern, lightweight, efficient, designed for manufacturing airframes and vehicles to be able to break the code on getting this flight training component down to being not a financial burden, let alone hurdle.
Mark, maybe same question, but maybe you are, I think, rated in more aircraft than anybody I know, and stay current in more aircraft than anybody I know, and so the training and recurrency component is, I know, a big part of your life. Why don't you reflect a little bit on this and how you go about handling all these different aircraft?
Well, thank you, Craig. And by the way, I just got a G111 rating, which is an Albatross rating this summer. And I'm waiting for Jack to buy one so I can be a flight demonstrator for Jack to buy that. But so I do have a few type ratings, and staying current in everything from Citations to King Airs to Albatrosses, occasionally even helicopters, is a challenge. But I just think that the world has really embraced simulation training in a whole different level, and the quality of the simulation is so much better than it used to be with from a few years back, that you can do an awful lot. And A, I think the quality is better. B, the cost certainly goes down. And I think that the adoption of the quality of training and everything that Redbird does, I'm not here to do a commercial for them, but it is really important stuff. And every flight school that I trip across nowadays has some kind of simulation device, and really embracing it. And particularly as we move into the winter and, darkness and all the other things, that cold, that can really make simulation a really important part of we call it the curriculum, to get this accomplished. Because we do hear lots of people are out there, and now you can put the school to work, a lot more hours if you're there. And so I think I'm bullish on where this whole thing is headed. And the equipment that Pete's members have put out available for older fleet is unbelievable. And the prices and the value, whether it's autopilots or PFDs, MFDs, and I thought we'd have a kind of a mini crash, if you will, after the ADS-B kind of got mostly installed. But most of the shops I talk to are still really busy, and installing that and needing more technicians is the number one thing that they keep asking us to help them find and evaluate technicians to put this stuff together. So bullish.
Great. Allison, you're a little disadvantaged in the sense that you've been there, as you said, through the COVID times. But I know when I went to the conferences that you all sponsored, there was always a very strong training component. And I'm wondering, what's appealing to your members in terms of training when it comes to aircraft as well as simulation?
So I did have the opportunity to get one conference under my belt before we went into. So I was, I look back on that with, that was probably my last in-person event. I think if we look at how technology has impacted training, and especially going forward, as it reduces the cost of training, it will open doors for those that didn't think that they could do it. And that is, I think, what I'm most excited about as we talk about flight simulation and technology upgrades, is how do you open the doors to those that thought it was cost prohibitive? And if we can lower the price of training, you are going to get a whole new demographic interested and excited by the prospect of actually being able to complete their goal. And so I think that our members are gobbling up the new technology advances, and it's really going to increase the accessibility for the next generation.
Thanks. We've been going for about 45 minutes, and I think we're going to get a couple lightning rounds in here in the sense to maybe close this off. I'm going to turn to Jack next, because what I'd like to do is what Redbird has always done with migration is provide a forum for a dialogue between industry leaders and the flight training community. And I just knowing that you're actually speaking in this program to several hundred people involved in flight training, I'd really welcome each of you taking just a couple minutes, whatever you want, but take a couple minutes to share, as you've been doing, but what would you like to say to those who are either engaged now or embarking on careers in flight training in terms of what it means to you and your members? And Jack, I'll start with you.
Well, that's a wide open topic there, Craig, on many fronts. I think because you had mentioned careers in flight training, and I've been an advocate and have written in the past about we really need to address the flight training career as we do any other professional career, whether it be the captain in the left seat or whether it be anybody involved in aviation, where I wish we could get our hands around putting the financial career path behind that so people will get into training and stay with it and not feel that it's a step along the way to the next part of their career. They should be treated like educational professionals. They should be compensated as such and be able to keep that stability in that as a career path. So I hope we can do more on trying to institutionalize that. I'm still bullish, as everybody else has mentioned, on where this is going as far as the need, pent-up demand that will occur. I think it was Mark and Pete both mentioned that when we get through the COVID period and the airlines start bouncing back, we will have gone through a year or 2 years or even up to as many 3 years of pilots aging out, continuing to age out. And as we know from just pure sheer demographics, that upper end in age group is huge. And we're going to end up in and we've talked about a shortage, we're going to end up in crisis du jour where we have them retiring out the top end and we haven't been able to fill the funnel at the lower end. So stay focused on that. Still going to be a fantastic career to be in, and the adjustments the airlines have made relative to pay grades and all that is fantastic. As far as the simulation training, I'm still trying to figure out, and I know I've talked to Charlie about it, to you, Craig, as far as how do we really get people to embrace simulation as being the ideal training platform for people to remain proficient, which EA is really promoting pilot proficiency to enhance the safety record of GA, which we all need to continue to work on, and to understand the efficiencies going forward. And I kind of look back early in my career. There was a time when people were trying to understand how CAD/CAM was going to enter into the engineering design space. And I remember sitting with the design group I was managing at Douglas, and there was Fred, who was the greatest lead layer on vellum that you ever had, and there was Marty, who just came out of school. And Fred was telling Marty, we got no place for automation, we got no place for CAD/CAM design, because I can lay out a vellum of a spar more accurately and better and more efficiently than you ever can, Marty. And I said, great, let's have a contest. We'll go at it. And they go at it, and Fred gets done faster than Marty can get his done. And then Marty asked the great question, okay, Fred, how much does your spar weigh? And are there any interferences with the competing structure? Fred looks at him and says, let me go to work on that. Marty pushes a button and the answer comes right back with the weights and all the interferences. Simulation gives us that efficiency. You can go to the outer marker and shoot 10 approaches in the time it takes you to 172 to do the step down VOR at Ontario in 2.5 hours. So we've got to find a way to embrace that and get our flight schools to understand that it's not about our instructors building flight time in the right seat to move on to their next career. It's really about the efficiency and the quality of the instruction that we can give students to launch them at a much higher capability than what they did just flying around in a 172. So I'll leave it at that.
Well said. Well said. Mark, share some thoughts with the flight training community online here.
Yeah, no, I think it's been really interesting as we've kind of developed and continue to roll out this flight training app and learning the best practices from flight school to flight school and seeing where people that have really embraced simulators, maybe sometimes it's a 2 or 3 to 1 to the actual flight hour. They're taking the cost significantly down. They're getting these people their ratings in the low 40 hours versus the national average right now, somewhere in the mid 70s. So you're creating real value. And I think if you're trying to create value for your customer, it's hard to beat that. And the word of mouth is still the best form of advertising when you're telling people you've saved them thousands of dollars. And frankly, as I've said, a better flight training experience. We still have some very, high levels of interest here. Right now, you're at 25,000 private pilot's license a year. We kind of bottomed out a few years ago at 17,000. I think if we ever get back to the 1970s, it was in the 50,000 private pilot's license. And I still think that is possible out there. 30, 40,000 licenses, PPLs a year. But we have a couple of things that my pal Jim Viola was really working hard at the FAA to get me some more DPEs. We need more DPEs, Jim. Get back in that FAA job. But that's still a narrow neck of the funnel in certain markets and certain geographies. The FAA has done some good things by getting more check rides available per day and doing some of the things like that and reducing the geographic restriction. But there is enough demand out there today between the way we're going to see this happen that I think you're going to see 30, 35,000 PPLs back on the docket here in the next couple of years.
That's great. Jim, a couple comments, and you're still on mute there. There you go.
Yeah, certainly. I think some of the topics have been hit, the quality, and with the quality normally comes, the mentorship of having the people that actually enjoy, doing the flight instruction. Since Mark talked about my FAA days, I remember, when I had that privilege of giving the FAA, the CFI check rides. When you show up and right off the bat, as you're doing the oral portion, you can tell if the guy's there just to build time with the person, not to limit it to just men, but, the applicant, is he there because he wants to do it, or he's there because it's a way to cost-wise to build time? And so when they're there because they grew up in Jack's part of the world, where they grew up pumping gas or doing something out in the grass field, it was so much more enjoyable to know that, we're actually making a professional that loves the industry, and he's going to, every student he touches, it's going to be great. And so the importance of that, of the flight instructor, from day one now, with the new way of making sure they understand risk mitigation right out of the get-go, with the certification process now, that's very important, and the importance of the flight instructor. So I think, with the professional organizations that are out there, such as NAFI and SAFE, that it's part of a profession. You're not just building time. It's about that end product, that human being that you're touching, and the glory of being a rotorcraft flight instructor or airplane flight instructor or some of the other vehicles out there, the future vertical lift instructors, when they walk up hungry, and you get to see them walk away and take that aircraft and fly off with it is just amazing. And I really hope that we keep that industry growing. I think that Redbird, in the way that they've made training more available, and as Mark said, some of the goals that Redbird put in place when they were looking at their some of their ways to train them, so that you can see that it is performance-based, and really, when you're now getting in the aircraft to log the times just to be able to take the check ride, when you can probably pass the check ride on day one because you did all that training in a AATD and a simulator, is amazing. So I do think that affects safety. You see the safety rates coming down. So I think there's a lot of great work and communication going on out there, and I'd love to see it continue into the future. And Redbird, thanks for doing this migration every year.
Thank you, Jim. Hey, Pete, message to the flight training community.
Well, I still think, Craig, that we have, we are scratching the surface, but we need to go further on the human automation interface and where we maximize doing training where. So if you look at, take the MAX accidents and the pilots that flew those, we all know as pilots that there were errors in pilotage, just basic stick and rudder pilotage that were made when the automation did something they weren't either trained on or expected or whatever. So, and we also know that we can do emergency training safer in a simulator and do much more complex training in a simulator for dial a disaster and what the sim instructor is going to do than we ever could do safely in the airplane. We also know there's different design philosophies. Airbus is much more automation centric than Boeing always had the human as the last major node in the whole design of the aircraft. And there is still a debate going on with that as the MAX comes back into service. So whatever we're training pilots to do, how we maximize just the automation piece of that, and can we do more in the simulator to make sure that people know how to use the automation, but also what to do if they've screwed up the automation. And I don't know how many times I screw up the automation all the time, and I just say, I'm switching this off just fine, and man, I screwed that one up, and what did I do wrong? And then how can we maximize the in-the-aircraft training to, one, bring down the cost, which does significantly, but also it's better training. And I think we as a community can do more and more of that. Airbus just finished their autonomous testing where they took off, and I think it was German city pairs where the entire airplane flew autonomously from takeoff to landing and the pilots were just there monitoring. Well, someday, somewhere, something's going to go wrong. And how do we wrap our heads around, where do the pilot skills have to come in, and how can we maximize that with actually being in the aircraft?
Great. Allison, on this round, you get the last word on messages to the flight training community.
Well, I'll attack the question from a slightly different vantage point, and I will say that if we want a robust workforce, then we have to work hand in hand with our flight training organizations to reach deeper into our to attract a more diverse population, and we have to think about training differently for different groups of people, and how do we retain them once they've walked in the door? And I know Mark Baker's organization has done a lot on that side, is how do you create a good flight training experience for those who have decided to take that leap and to start their training. Once they start, we need to keep them progressing. We cannot have them fall out of the system in some way, because we need every available and interested party to continue through the process. And Jack, I completely agree with you. Flight training, those instructors, that is a skill set that is different from just knowing how to do it. It's how do you teach somebody else, and that is something that needs to be valued more than just a step along the way. The good ones are fantastic, and we can't lose them because that they've hit a certain number of hours and they're headed on to the next goal. So. I really look at flight training as something that will just encourage more people to get their ratings and get into the industry if it's done right.
Excellent points. Okay, for the final lightning round, I'm going to throw you a little curve, but I know you can handle it. 5 smart people here. When this panel is viewed, it'll be just days away from an election. I'm not going to ask you to predict the outcome of the election, but what I would like you to do is take a couple minutes and look forward to 2021 in terms of public policy and how it affects aviation. All of you are intimately involved in shaping some of those discussions. And in terms of opportunities or risks, I'm just wondering, maybe we'll close out with this, wondering what you're seeing from a public policy standpoint in the year ahead. Jack, we'll start with you and go around again.
Oh, I thought we weren't ever going to bring politics, religion, or anything else.
I did it last. I
was more interested in seeing Mark's certificate, because with all his endorsements, it probably looks like a Cheesecake Factory menu of 27 pages. But anyway, public policy. Here's the 2 issues that I'm concerned with. We're right now having these major discussions relative to what I call an inflection point around certification. And Pete's group is so intimately involved with this. Are we going to go forward or are we going to go backwards? So I think it's very important that we don't lose ground on the certification as we know it today. And that's going to be critically important as a result of the MAX stuff. There's another piece of the public policy going forward, which is getting ahead of all of these new technologies and trying to find the paths to certify technologies that we don't even need to exist today. And if we don't start working and getting all that sorted out and done, all the wonderful ideas and investments that are being made today are going to land with a thud, because there isn't going to be a path to get them across the finish line. So I think from an aviation industry public policy standpoint, right now, to me, that seems like the number one priority around public policy.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, I got a couple of things on my list of things I'm concerned about. Pete works hard on this PAFI initiative, the Piston Aviation Fuel Initiative. We've been able to get away with low lead for a long period of time. We're still working hard, trying to find replacements for that fuel. That could become more urgent if administration has a strong feeling about it's time to get this down the road. I'm worried a little about that, but so far everybody's working on it. We're getting the extensions we need to have that done. The medical certification at the FAA is still a problem with the special issuance, and working from home from the FAA's perspective doesn't work. We've got like an 18-month backlog in a number of the areas there. Yet Basic Med is one of the great things that all of us work together to make happen. Got 60,000 people flying under basic med, and it'll come up for its review next year. So we've got some things on the horizon that are kind of make me a little bit cautious about things we got to be paying attention to. That's why we have these associations. And then finally, Jack has been with Pete working on this mosaic rule. How are we going to take care of these older aircraft, and what does light sport really mean, and what are we really trying to accomplish? I think we're going to start to see some of that evidence, what the FAA is thinking as we look forward into 2021 and 22 for sure. And I think there's a real hopeful and positive move that could change the way we think about certification and updating some of these older airplanes.
Thanks. Jim, I know there's no shortage of issues for the rotorcraft community.
Yeah, and it's start off right there with certification. When I walked through and met all the members in January in Anaheim, it was clear that certification was the number one issue, and certainly working close with Gamma and Pete to make sure we take that on. There's also the access issue that Mark's very familiar with. Not only to keep what we have, but on the rotorcraft side and the vertical lift side is we have to expand. I mean, I've been fighting even on when I was in the FAA side, trying to allow more heliports inside the SFRA. You just can't get when you have these conversations on public policy, and you got people like Lockheed Martin who do most of the security and DoD work, but they can't fly their helicopter inside the freeze. I mean, it's kind of like, what are we talking about, guys? And then, the vertiport and control of that throughout in the United States, we have the issue with each state trying to control their airspace a little differently because they want to try to take ownership of that. We can't allow that. The FAA cannot allow states to govern, what we're doing with UAS and vertical lift and the deliveries of the future. And when they do stuff like, there was some proposed banning of helicopters over New York City. That really complicates when you get into what is an aircraft, what is a helicopter, what is vertical flight. So all the things that come off of that we have to take on for our memberships in industry. And then I really am open to, and of course have been delayed with the pandemic, of traveling internationally because we are internationally, and try to take some of those vehicles that are already with the urban air mobility stuff is flying in other countries. And I want to go there as an association lead and try to bring some of that stuff back to the United States and make sure that we share it evenly around the globe. So those are some of my things I'd like to get done in 2021.
Thanks, Jim. Hey, Pete, things haven't changed much. Everybody keeps saying they're working with you on these issues. What's on top of Gamma's list, though?
Well, I appreciate my friends here, all the support they're giving us on the certification thing, because I could agree if this goes the wrong way, it could really be bad. And I share those concerns and appreciate. I'm going to pivot to opportunities. We, and especially with some of the things that Allison was saying, we have support, bipartisan support up in the Congress right now of legislation moving forward to stimulate more women to get into our industry. And the more we can talk that up, because it's God country and apple pie, we know we have an untapped resource out there of women that need to come into our industry, and we ought to be just pounding the table to say this legislation is good, help us. And Mark's got some initiatives moving forward now with the aerospace initiative going on that now was introduced in the House. And in addition to that, if you look at the emphasis on social responsibility and the racial issues that we have going on in the country, what better thing can we do than to be going into large cities in our country and saying, you have economic opportunity that's just fantastic if you want to go in and go to an A&P school, and here is a way that you can get scholarships to do that right here in Washington, D.C. The University District of Columbia has a program over at Reagan National Airport, and it's got one of the best graduation rates in the country. Each one of those men and women that have gone through that course have a job well before they graduate, and most of them are making more than their parents make. And we have a potential to go and expand that and work on it, because we need that workforce, as Jim was talking about, and we can attack these with support that I can't see any Republican or Democrat being against what we would want to do there. And so I see that as great opportunity no matter which administration or the complexion of the next Congress looks like.
Thanks. Allison, what issues are you looking at for the year ahead?
I will just extend on what Pete was talking about. That is what I think is the greatest opportunity for us in the years ahead, is the momentum that we have in Congress for understanding the workforce requirements that we will have going forward. And yeah, it is completely bipartisan. Our industry provides opportunity and access, and these jobs across the spectrum are incredibly well paying. And if you look at the A&P example, there is such demand for mechanics going forward, and every school echoes that sentiment, which is they don't even graduate before they are being scooped up by an employer, and the salaries are so competitive. So that is what fills me with such encouragement and excitement is the momentum of the government behind our cause and getting more women into the industry, getting more minorities in the industry. It's gonna. I think the future is really bright.
Well, thank you so much. On behalf of Redbird and on behalf of the hundreds of people in the flight training community that are listening to our panel discussion, I want to thank all 5 of you. It's great to see wonderful friends, and I think you leave no doubt in the minds of those who are engaged in flight training that good, solid professional training is key to each one of your organizations and a large part of what you're involved in. It's wonderful to be together, even if it's this way. And again, thank you for participating in this year's Redbird Migration. And we'll turn it back to the program.